The woman who would become the world's most famous face began her life in relative anonymity and deep instability. Born Norma Jeane Mortenson on June 1, 1926, at the Los Angeles County Hospital, she was the daughter of Gladys Pearl Baker. Her father's identity remained a mystery for much of her life, though it was later confirmed to be Charles Stanley Gifford, a co-worker of her mother who had little interest in his child. From the very beginning, Norma Jeane's life was marked by displacement. Her mother, Gladys, suffered from severe mental health issues, eventually diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenia, which led to her being institutionalized for the majority of Norma Jeane's upbringing. Without a stable home, Norma Jeane became a ward of the state. She spent her formative years bouncing between foster homes and an orphanage. One of the most significant figures in her early life was Grace Goddard, a friend of her mother who became her legal guardian. However, the stability was often short-lived. Norma Jeane lived in at least 12 different foster placements. In many of these environments, she was neglected or subjected to sexual abuse, experiences that left her with deep-seated anxieties and a lifelong stutter. She often sought refuge in the darkened theaters of Los Angeles, where she would watch movies for hours, finding in the glamorous figures on the screen a hope for a different kind of life. The constant shifting from one family to another instilled in her a desperate need for love and belonging, but also a profound fear of abandonment. She was often described as a shy, mousy girl, tall for her age and often dressed in hand-me-downs that invited ridicule from her peers. At the age of 15, she was living with the Goddards when Grace's husband was transferred to the East Coast. Because they could not afford to take Norma Jeane and California law prevented her from leaving the state, she faced the prospect of returning to the orphanage. To avoid this, a marriage was arranged with their neighbor's 21-year-old son, James Doherty. On June 19, 1942, just weeks after her 16th birthday, Norma Jeane married Doherty. She dropped out of high school to become a housewife. While the marriage provided her with the legal protection she needed to stay out of the foster system, it was not a union of passion. Doherty later recalled that they were more like playmates than husband and wife. For Norma Jeane, it was a practical solution to a desperate situation, but the domestic life of a 1940s housewife would soon prove too small for the ambitions that were quietly taking root within her. World War II changed the trajectory of Norma Jeane's life. When James Doherty was deployed with the Merchant Marine in 1944, Norma Jeane took a job at the Radioplane Company, a munitions factory in Van Nuys, California. Her task was spraying airplane parts with fire retardant and inspecting parachutes. It was here that she was discovered. In 1945, Army photographer David Conover was sent by the U.S. Army Air Force's 1st Motion Picture Unit to take morale-boosting photos of female workers. He was immediately struck by the photogenic young woman and encouraged her to apply to the Blue Book Model Agency. By 1946, she had become one of the most successful models on the West Coast, appearing on dozens of magazine covers. This success prompted her to divorce Doherty, as her new career clashed with his desire for a traditional wife. With her hair bleached a striking platinum blonde and her name legally changed to Marilyn Monroe, a name chosen by studio executive Ben Lyon, who liked the alliteration and the homage to Broadway star Marilyn Miller, she signed her first contract with 20th Century Fox. However, her initial years in Hollywood were far from glamorous. Her first contract was not renewed, and she spent several years as a starlet, taking bit parts and posing for photos to pay the bills. During this period of professional uncertainty, Marilyn demonstrated a fierce work ethic. She took acting, dancing, and singing classes, determined to mold herself into a star. In 1948, she signed a brief contract with Columbia Pictures, where she starred in her first lead role in the low-budget musical Ladies of the Chorus. Though the film was not a hit, it showcased her potential as a musical performer. Despite this, she was dropped again, leading to a period of financial hardship. It was during this time, in 1949, that she famously posed for a series of nude calendar photos taken by Tom Kelly. She was paid only $50 for the session, a decision made out of desperation to pay her rent, but one that would later become a pivotal moment in her public narrative. By the end of the 1940s, Monroe began to catch the eye of influential figures in the industry, including Johnny Hyde, a powerful agent at the William Morris Agency. Hyde became her mentor and lover, believing in her talent when few others did. He used his connections to secure her small but scene-stealing roles in major films like John Huston's The Asphalt Jungle and Joseph L. Mankiewicz's All About Eve. In both films, she played the arm candy of older powerful men, but her natural screen presence and comedic timing made her stand out. These performances served as the breakout she had been waiting for, setting the stage for the absolute stardom of the 1950s. The early 1950s saw Marilyn Monroe's transformation from a struggling actress into the most recognizable woman in the world. Following her success in All About Eve, 20th Century Fox signed her to a long-term contract. In 1952, the nude calendar photos she had taken years earlier were discovered. While the studio feared the scandal would destroy her career, Marilyn handled the situation with a candid honesty that endeared her to the public. She admitted she had been broke and hungry, turning a potential disaster into a narrative of survival. That same year, she appeared on the cover of the first-ever issue of Playboy, solidifying her status as the ultimate sex symbol of the era. In 1953, Monroe starred in 3 career-defining films: Niagara, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and How to Marry a Millionaire. In Niagara, she played a femme fatale, showing a darker, more dramatic side. However, it was Gentlemen Prefer Blondes that cemented her dumb blonde persona, a character that was actually highly calculated and required immense comedic skill. Her performance of Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend became one of the most iconic moments in cinema history. By the end of 1953, she was the top female box office draw in the world. Her personal life during this peak was equally high-profile. In 1954, she married baseball legend Joe DiMaggio. The union was viewed as the ultimate American romance, the king of baseball and the queen of Hollywood. However, the marriage was fraught with tension. DiMaggio was deeply traditional and possessive. He hated Marilyn's sexy image and the attention she received from other men. The tension came to a head during the filming of The 7-Year Itch, 1955, and its famous skirt-blowing scene over a New York subway grate. DiMaggio was reportedly furious during the filming, and the couple divorced just 9 months after their wedding. Despite her massive success, Marilyn was deeply unhappy with her professional standing. She felt the studio was underpaying her and typecasting her in repetitive, blonde bombshell roles. In a move that shocked Hollywood, she walked out on her contract in 1955 and moved to New York City. She co-founded her own production company, Marilyn Monroe Productions, and began studying at the Actors Studio under the legendary Lee Strasberg. This was a period of intense self-reflection and growth. She wanted to be a serious actress, and while the industry mocked her for it, her dedication to the method would eventually lead to some of her most acclaimed performances. After her sabbatical in New York, Marilyn returned to Hollywood on her own terms. She had negotiated a new contract with Fox that gave her higher pay and, more importantly, a say in directors and scripts. Her first film back was Bus Stop, 1956, in which she played Sherry, a talentless saloon singer. The role was a departure from her previous glamour. She purposefully used pale, unflattering makeup and a southern accent. Critics were stunned by her vulnerability, and she received her first Golden Globe nomination. It seemed that Marilyn was finally being recognized as a legitimate artist. In the summer of 1956, she married the Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Arthur Miller. To the public, it was The Egghead and the Hourglass. For Marilyn, Miller represented the intellectual respect and fatherly stability she had always craved. During their marriage, she converted to Judaism and stood loyally by him when he was called to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee, WAC, refusing to distance herself from him despite the risks to her career. They traveled to England so she could film The Prince and the Showgirl with Laurence Olivier. The shoot was notoriously difficult. Olivier was frustrated by her reliance on her acting coach, Paula Strasberg, and Marilyn was devastated to find a diary entry where Miller expressed disappointment in her. The late 1950s were a time of escalating personal pain. Marilyn desperately wanted to be a mother, but her struggles with endometriosis led to multiple miscarriages and an ectopic pregnancy. These losses, combined with the pressures of stardom and a crumbling marriage, led to an increased dependence on alcohol and prescription drugs, barbiturates. Despite her internal turmoil, she delivered what many consider her finest performance in Billy Wilder's Some Like It Hot, 1959. Though she was often late to the set and struggled to remember her lines, her presence on screen was luminous, earning her a Golden Globe for Best Actress. By 1960, her marriage to Miller was in its final stages. They collaborated on her final completed film, The Misfits, which Miller wrote specifically for her. The film was shot in the grueling heat of the Nevada desert and mirrored the sadness of her real life. Her character, Rosalind, was a sensitive woman surrounded by men who didn't understand her. During the shoot, Marilyn's health declined rapidly. She was hospitalized for exhaustion and her drug use became more apparent. She and Miller separated immediately after filming ended and divorced in early 1961. The world watched as the woman who had everything seemed to be losing her grip on her own life. The final 18 months of Marilyn Monroe's life were a blur of medical procedures, brief professional hope, and deep isolation. Following her divorce from Miller and the lukewarm reception of the Misfits, she spent several weeks in the Payne Whitney Psychiatric Clinic in New York. The experience was traumatic. She was placed in a padded cell, an event that echoed her mother's institutionalization. She was eventually rescued by Joe DiMaggio, who remained a devoted friend and protector until her death. She returned to California, buying a modest home in Brentwood, the first house she had ever owned on her own. In 1962, Marilyn began work on a new comedy, Something's Got to Give. However, her health continued to fail. She suffered from chronic sinusitis and fevers, leading to frequent absences from the set. In May 1962, despite being sick, she traveled to New York to sing Happy Birthday, Mr. President, for John F. Kennedy's birthday gala at Madison Square Garden. Her performance, delivered in a sheer, rhinestone-encrusted dress, became legendary but further strained her relationship with 20th Century Fox. In June, the studio fired her from the film, citing her frequent absences, and filed a lawsuit against her. It was the lowest point of her professional life. In the weeks leading up to her death, there were signs of a potential comeback. She had begun negotiations to be rehired on Something's Got to Give, was planning a series of interviews with major magazines like Life and Vogue, and was discussing future film projects. She took part in The Last Sitting with photographer Bert Stern, a 3-day photo session that captured her in moments of both extreme glamour and startling vulnerability. However, the private Marilyn was struggling. She was lonely, frequently making late-night phone calls to friends and her psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson. On the night of August 4, 1962, Marilyn Monroe died in her home in Brentwood. She was found in the early hours of August 5 by her housekeeper, clutching a telephone. The cause of death was ruled acute barbiturate poisoning and a probable suicide. She was only 36 years old. Her death sparked endless conspiracy theories involving the Kennedys and the mob, but the tragic reality was a woman who had fought a lifelong battle with mental illness and addiction. Joe DiMaggio organized her funeral, famously sending roses to her grave 3 times a week for the next 20 years. In death, Marilyn Monroe ceased to be a mere actress and became a permanent fixture of the human imagination, a symbol of beauty, vulnerability, and the high price of the American dream.